Hey everyone, welcome back to our YouTube channel Code and Create. Today I'm excited to walk you through the project we are about to build from scratch using React Color Converter app. So what exactly is this Color Converter app? In simple terms, this app will allow users to convert between two common color formats, RGB and HEX. RGB stands for red, green and blue, and HEX is a hexadecimal code that represents colors often used in web development. In this application, we will create an interface where users can input RGB values to get the corresponding hex color code and vice versa. And as they make adjustments, we'll provide a live preview of the color. It is a fun, interactive tool that can help you understand how colors are represented in web development and web design. Let me break down the key features you will see in this project. We will implement a smooth conversion from RGB to HEX and back from HEX to RGB. So no matter which format the user starts with, the application will handle the conversion automatically. As the user tweaks the values, whether it is by adjusting the RGB sliders or entering a HEX code, the color preview will update in real time. This gives an immediate visual representation of the color. We will build easy-to-use input fields for both RGB and HEX values. For RGB, we will have number inputs for red, green, and blue. For hexadecimal values, users can simply type in the code, and the app will convert it on the fly. We're also adding some smart validation to ensure that users enter valid color codes, so no need to worry about breaking the application with incorrect inputs. By the end of this project, you will have a fully functional color converter that's not only practical, but also looks awesome. You'll be able to tweak colors and convert them. So stick around and let's dive into building this cool little application together. Before we jump right into the coding part, please don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you never miss upcoming tutorials. And also please leave a comment below. It is super important for the growth of the channel and helps us bring you more awesome content. Alright, so let's dive into building our project. The first step is a project setup. A good setup can save you a lot of time and headaches down the road. It ensures that you have a solid structure to build upon and that you're using the right tools for the job. So let's get started with the very first step, installing Node.js. To work with modern JavaScript tools and frameworks, we need Node.js. Node.js is a runtime environment that allows you to run JavaScript code outside of a web browser. It is built on Chrome's V8 JavaScript engine and is perfect for building fast and scalable network applications. For us, it is essential because it allows us to use npm Node Package Manager to manage our project dependencies. If you don't have Node.js installed yet, don't worry, the installation process is straightforward. Just go to the Node.js website, download the installer for your operating system and follow the instructions. There are a couple of different ways to create a React application. For a long time, the Create React app was the go-to method for setting up a new React project. It provided a quick and easy way to get started with React, but as the ecosystem evolved, it became somewhat outdated and slow. That's why many developers, including myself, have transitioned to using Vite, which offers a much faster and more modern development experience. Now let's talk about Vite. Vite is a modern build tool that provides a fast and lean development experience for modern web projects. It is incredibly fast because it leverages native ES modules and tools like ESBuild for transpilation, making it perfect for a React project. Vite significantly improves the speed of your development workflow compared to traditional tools like Create React App. You can find more information and the official documentation on the Vite website. I highly recommend taking a quick look to familiarize yourself with its features and benefits. First, I have created a new folder on my desktop called Color Converter App. This folder is currently empty, and this is where we will be setting up our React application. To start, let's open this folder in Visual Studio Code. You can do the same by going to the top menu and selecting File, Open Folder, and then navigating to your Color Converter App folder. In order to create a React application, we'll be using the terminal to set up our project. And for this, I'll be using the terminal built into Visual Studio Code. To open the terminal in VS Code, you can simply press Ctrl plus tilde sign, or go to the top menu, View, and select Terminal. Okay, so in order to create a new React application, we have to run the following command. We need npm create vid at latest, followed by the name of the project, which is going to be color converter app. Then we need dashes, then again dashes with template, and finally we need React. Let's go ahead and break down this command. npm create vid latest tells npm to create a new project using the latest version of vid. Color converter app is a name of the project folder that will be created. Then we have dash dash template React. It specifies that we want to use the React template provided by vid. After running this command, vid will set up a new React project for us. Once the setup is complete, let's go ahead and navigate into the project directory using cd color converter app. Next, we need to install the project dependencies. This is done by running npm install. Dependencies are the packages and libraries that our project needs to run. Installing them ensures that everything is set up correctly and we can start working on our application. Finally, we have to run our project in the browser. For that, we have to run the following command, npm run dev. It will generate a local URL. We can either copy this link and paste it into the browser tab, or we can simply press Alt and then click the link. So, as you can see, our React application is up and running in the browser. We have here some default icons of vid and React, which include the links to the websites of these tools. Then we have here some textual elements, and also you can see here a counter that works once we click the button. So this is the default little project that is generated when you create and install the React application using vid. I'm going to place the editor and the browser side by side, like so, to make our working process more convenient. Now that we have our project set up, let's take a look at the structure of the generated files and folders. First, we have here node modules. This folder contains all the dependencies and packages installed for our project. When we run npm install, it installs everything specified in the package.json file into this folder. It is crucial for the functioning of our application, but we typically don't need to interact with it directly. Then we have public folder. This folder is used for static assets that can be directly accessed by the browser. Here we can place images, fonts, and other assets that don't change frequently. Right now, this folder includes an SVG icon of the vid. Next, we have an src folder. This is the main folder where we'll be writing our application code. It contains the React components and application logic. Inside src, you will find assets folder. An assets folder includes an SVG icon of the React. Then you can find here app.css file. This file contains the CSS styles specific to the app component. Then we have app.jsx file. This file contains our main application component. It is a functional component where we'll define the layout and structure of our application. Next, we have index.css file. It contains the global CSS styles for our application. These styles are applied across all components and pages. Next, you can find here main.jsx file. This is the entry point for our React application. It initializes the React application and mounts it to the DOM. Typically, it imports React DOM and our root component, app.jsx, and renders it. Besides that, you can find here index.html file. This file is crucial as it contains the root div element where our React application will be mounted. It also includes metadata, links to style sheets, and other critical elements needed by the browser to render the application. Below you can find the configuration file for vid. This file allows us to customize the build process and configure various settings for our development and production environments. Each of these folders and files has a specific role in the project. Understanding their purpose will help you navigate and organize your code more efficiently. Next, we'll clean up some of the default files and folders that we don't need. This will help keep our project organized and focused. Here is what we will do. I'm going to delete an SVG icon from the public folder. Then we don't need the assets folder. Next, I'm going to open app.css file and delete all the styles. Then we have app.jsx file. I'm going to delete the entire content, and then I'm going to create a new functional component using shortcut RAFCE. This is a part of one of the VS Code packages called ES7 React Snippets. You can find and install this package and use different shortcuts, like I used here one of them to create a functional component. Before we move on to the next file, I want to link the app.css file to our app component. So we need to import app.css. Next we have index.css file, and I'm going to delete all the styles from here as well. Finally, I'm going to modify the index.html file. Let's get rid of the fob icon and also change the title. It's going to be color converter app. Alright, so that's it about the project setup. We are ready to start to build our application, so let's move on. So the first thing that I'm going to do is to create a JSX for our application. I mean the structure and the content of the app. So here we have a single div element with the text app. I'm going to delete this text from here, and I'm going to add a class name to the div element, and it's going to be app. Inside the div element, I'm going to create h1 heading element, which is going to be color converter. Then after h1 heading element, we need another div, and it's going to be RGB section. Inside the div element, we need to create h2 heading element, which is going to be RGB. Then after that, we need to open div element, which is going to be input groups. And inside the div element, I'm going to open the input group itself. It's going to be a div element. Inside the input group, we will have two elements, the label and the input element. So we need here label. And inside here, I'm going to insert R. Then after that, we need input element. The type is going to be number. Then we need here name, and it's going to be R. Then we need minimum value. Actually, we need here minimum. It's going to be 0. As for the maximum value, it's going to be 255. And then we need value. By default, I'm going to add here 255. Alright, so that's it about the first input group. I'm going to duplicate this code twice. We will have 3 input groups overall. So we need here our G, then we need here G. As for the value, it's going to be 103. Then the third input group, I mean the label element, is going to be B. Then we need here B. As for the value, I'm going to insert here 87. Alright, so that's it about the RGB section. So here we have the input elements with the labels. We have here the number input elements. Next, I'm going to create the hex section. So right after that div elements, I'm going to open another div, and it's going to be hex section. Inside here, I'm going to open h2 heading element, which is going to be hex. Then after h2 heading element, I'm going to open input with type text, and also we need here another attribute called max length. It's going to be 7. After that, I'm going to create another div element, and it's going to be color preview. Actually, I think that we are missing here one element. Right after up, we need to create another div element, and it's going to be converter. Then I'm going to grab the entire content and paste it here. So now I think everything's correct. All right, let's go to the browser. So we have here all the elements, and now we have to take care of the styling of our application. First of all, I'm going to open index.css file. Let's move the CSS file to the right side in our VS Code. So I'm going to select every element, and then I'm going to reset default margin and padding. Let's set both of them to 0. And then we need box sizing to be border box. In this case, the size of the element will include padding and border. Next, I'm going to select HTML elements, and I'm going to change the font size of the HTML. Let's set it to 62.5%. So throughout this project, we're going to use rem as the measurement unit. By default, 1 rem is equal to 16 pixels because the font size of the HTML element is equal to 16 pixels. I want to convert 1 rem into 10 pixels, and that's why we decrease here the font size of the HTML. Right now, 1 rem will be equal to 10 pixels. All right, so before we move on and start to style the actual elements of our application, I want to import Google Fonts from the Google Fonts website. So let's go ahead and search for Google Fonts. I'm going to search for font called Lilita 1. Let's click Get Fonts. Then go back and search for another font. It's going to be Made Messy. This one. Let's click Get Fonts. Then we need Get Embed Code. Click Import and grab this link from here. I'm going to paste it here. Alright, so actually that's it about the index.css file. Now I'm going to open app.css file, where we should select the wrapper development, which is app. So let's select app. Define width and height. The width is going to be 100%. Then we need height, which is going to be 100 viewport height. It means that the height will be 100% of the viewport. Next, we need display grid and place items center. It will allow us to center the content of the element. So if we check the browser, you will see that the content is placed in center. Next, I'm going to select converter. We need to define width and height. The width is going to be 90%. And also I'm going to define max width for responsive purposes. Let's set max width to 80 rem. Then we need height, which is going to be 45 rem. And also change the background color. Let's use here color 121212. Let's check the browser. So here we have the converter. Actually, it is not placed perfectly in the center because we use display grid and we have here two elements, color preview and converter, but we'll fix that soon. So now I'm going to add here a couple of more styles. We need display flex in order to align the content of the converter. Next, I'm going to change the direction of the flex layout. I'm going to place the elements vertically in a column. Therefore, we need here flex direction column. Next, I'm going to use justify content center and also align items center. Actually, this part, I mean the styling part, is optional. You can feel free and skip it if you don't want to write the CSS, but I encourage you to at least watch this part because you might find some new techniques and tricks in CSS and it will be helpful for you. All right, so next I'm going to create some gap using row gap. Let's set it to 3 rem, and also I'm going to use border radius. Let's make it 3 rem. Okay, so here we have the converter. which looks pretty nice. Next, I'm going to customize color preview. So let's select these elements. I'm going to define its size using width and height. The width is going to be 100%. As for the height, I'm going to make it 100 viewport height. Then I'm going to define its position. We need position absolute. Then we need position relative for the parent element, because we're going to position the element according to the parent element, which is app. So now I'm going to add here inset 0. This property allows us to use 4 positions at the same time. I mean top, left, right, and bottom positions. In this case, all 4 positions are set to 0. All right, let's change the background color. I'm going to use our default color, which is going to be FF6757. So here we have the color preview, and actually the converter is hidden. It ended up behind the color preview. So in order to fix that, I'm going to use the index property with the negative value -1. So now here we have the converter. All right, after that, I'm going to customize the elements inside the converter. Let's start with the heading elements. Let's go ahead and select color converter. Actually, not color, but just converter. Followed by the H1 heading element. I'm going to change the font family. Let's use here font called Mate Messy sans serif. Then we need font size to be 5 rem. I'm going to change the color. It's going to be white. Then we need letter spacing with value 0.4 rem. And finally, I'm going to create some space at the bottom using margin bottom 3 rem. So here we have the heading, which looks pretty nice. Next, I'm going to take care of the RGB section. So let's go ahead and select these elements. We need display flex. Then again, we have to change the direction because we're going to place the flex items vertically in the column. So we need here flex direction with value column. And then I'm going to use align items with the value center. Okay, after that, I'm going to select heading elements. Actually, I'm going to customize both headings. I mean the heading of the RGB section and also the heading of the hex section. So let's go ahead and select both headings simultaneously. We need RGB section H2 and then hex section H2. Let's define the font size. It's going to be 3.5 rem. Then we need color. Let's use here this color. Then I'm going to use letter spacing with the value 0.3 rem. And finally, we need text align center. Let's check the results. So the headings look good. And actually, we need to change the font family. I'm going to use the second font for all the elements inside the color converter except the heading. So therefore, I'm going to add font family here for every element. Let's add here Lilita 1 cursive and check the results. So as you can see, the font for every element is changed. All right, so that's it about the headings. Now I'm going to take care of the input elements. Let's go back to the app.css file and select wrapper input groups. I'm going to use flexbox. We need display flex. Then I'm going to select input group itself. Let's use again display flex. Then I'm going to align items in the center. And finally, we need column gap. Actually, we need column gap with the value 1 rem. Okay, so the input elements are aligned nicely. Now I'm going to customize the labels. So let's go ahead and select label. I'm going to set font size to 2.5 rand. As for the color, it's going to be white. So the labels look pretty nice. And now we have to customize the input elements. I mean both input types, number and text. So let's go ahead and select inputs. Then we need type number. Let's duplicate this code. We need here text. So first of all, let's define the size of the input elements. I'm going to set width to 12 rand. Then we need height, which is going to be 4 rand. Let's change the background color. I'm going to make it transparent. Then I'm going to get rid of default border. Let's set it to none. And I'm going to define border top and border bottom. So border top is going to be 0.2 rand. Solid. As for the color, I'm going to use this red color. Let's duplicate this line of code and change border top to border bottom. Let's check the results. So as you can see, the input elements look pretty nice. Next, I'm going to define the color of the text. It's going to be white. Then we need outline to be none. Also, let's place the text in the center using text align center. And finally, I'm going to increase the font size. It's going to be 2.5 rand. Okay, so as you can see, the inputs look pretty nice. Actually, I'm going to add here the default value, I mean the hexadecimal value of this red color. So I'm going to add here value. It's going to be FF6757. So here we have the hexadecimal value of the color. All right. After that, I'm going to select input with type number and create some space. Let's grab this selector and add here margin right with the value 3 rand. All right. So everything looks good. The only thing that we have to do is to hide those arrows. I don't like these default arrows, so I'm going to get rid of them. In order to select them, we have to use the following selector. We need input group followed by input type. It's going to be number. Then we need WebKit, outer, spin button. Then I'm going to duplicate this selector, and instead of outer, we need inner. In order to hide those arrows, we need to use appearance with value none. So let's check the results. As you can see, we no longer have here those arrows. All right, so with the styling, we're done. And now we have to make our application functional. The first thing that we have to do is to create state variables. These state variables will be used to manage the data that our application will be working with. In React, state is used to store and manage the dynamic information that the component needs to render and update. Whenever the state changes, the component will re-render to reflect those changes in the UI. We have to create 2 state variables in the app component, one to hold the RGB color values and another to hold the hex color values. This will allow us to store and manage the colors as users interact with the application. So I'm going to create new variable and I'm going to insert here RGB, then set RGB. It's going to be equal to useState hook. As you see, useState is imported automatically from React. If you don't see here useState hook, then you have to import it manually. Otherwise, you will get error. So by default, I'm going to insert here an object with 3 properties, R, G, and B. So the first will be R with the value 255. Then we need here G, the value will be 1, 0, 3. As for the third property, we need B with value 87. So we inserted here this red color. All right, so we create a state variable called RGB and its corresponding function setRGB using the useState hook. This hook is provided by React and it allows us to add state to functional components. This variable holds the current state, which in this case is an object containing three properties, R, G, and B. These represent the red, green, and blue components of the RGB color format. We initialize the state with the default values 255, 1, 0, 3, and 8, 7. So R255 means the red component of the color is at its maximum value. G103 means the green component is about halfway, and B87 gives us a blue component that is slightly lower. setRGB is the function we will use to update the state. Anytime the user interacts with the RGB inputs, we'll use this function to change the values of R, G, or B. React will re-render the component and display the updated color whenever this function is called. Now I'm going to create second state variable, and it's going to be hex with setHex function. Then we need useState hook, and by default I'm going to insert here color FF6757. So similarly, we create another state variable called hex and its corresponding function setHex. The hex variable holds the hex color code as a string. In this example, we initialize it with FF6757. Hex is another way to represent colors in web development using 6 hexadecimal characters, typically preceded by a pound sign. In this case, FF6757 represents this red color. So setHex function allows us to update the hex state. Whenever the user inputs or changes the hex value, we'll use this function to update the state with a new value, and the application will re-render with the updated color. Alright, so once we created the state, now we can change the background color of the color preview element dynamically. Right now, we have here background color in CSS file, but I'm going to change it in JSX. So I'm going to add here style attributes, and then we need background color with value hex. Now if we delete this property from here, we still have here the red color. All right. Next we have to update RGB and hex states, and for that we need to create functions that handle these updates whenever the user interacts with the input fields. The two functions we're going to create are handle RGB change and handle hex change. These functions will allow us to capture the user input from both the RGB and hex fields and update the state accordingly. Let me walk you through how each of these functions will work and why we need them. So I'm going to create the first function, and it's going to be handle RGB change. It's going to be an arrow function. We need here e parameter. Then I'm going to destructor two properties, name and value, from e.targets. After that, we have to update RGB using setRGB function, and I'm going to insert here objects with spread operator. We need RGB, and then we need name, and I'm going to insert here number with value. Okay, so what this function does is handle the updates specifically for the RGB input fields. We need this function because as the user changes the values of the red, green, or blue components, we want to capture that change and immediately update the RGB state. Here is how it works. First, we take the event object as an argument. This event object contains all the information about the interaction with the input field. Next, we destructure two key properties from e.target, name and value. Name corresponds to the name attribute of the input field, which could be R for red, G for green, or B for blue. Value is the actual number the user has entered or changed in the input field. Then we call setRGB, which is the state updater function for our RGB state, but we don't just set the entire state to a new value. Instead, we do a partial update using the spread operator. It takes the existing RGB state, which is an object, and copies all its current values, R, G, and B, into a new object. We then override only the specific color component that was changed by the user using name, number, value. This way, if the user changes the red value, we only update the R component without affecting G or B. Finally, we wrap the value in number function to ensure that the input is treated as a number, not as a string, because input values are typically treated as strings by default. This ensures that our RGB values remain numeric, which is crucial for calculations and conversions. Now let's go ahead and create the second function, which is going to be handle hex change. We need again an arrow function with an event object. So inside here, we need to update hex state variable using setHex function, and we have to insert e.target.value. Now the handle hex change function is much simpler, but just as important. It handles the updates specifically for the hex input field. Here is what happens in this function. Again, we take the event object as the argument. This event object provides us with information about the hex input field interaction. We simply call setHex, which is the state updater function for our hex state. The value we pass to setHex is e.target.value, which is the new hex value the user entered into the input field. So whenever the user types a new hex color code, the handle hex change function captures that value and updates the hex state accordingly. So in summary, these two functions are critical for making our app dynamic and interactive. Without them, the input fields would just be static and no changes would be reflected in the app. By using handle RGB change and handle hex change functions, we ensure that every time the user enters a value or adjusts a color, the application responds immediately by updating the state and, in turn, the displayed color. Next, we need to create the converter functions that will handle the transformation between the two color formats, RGB to hex and hex to RGB. These functions will be the core of our app's functionality because they will allow us to switch between these two common color representations. So we need to create a new function here, and it's going to be RGB to hex. We need here three parameters, R, G, and B. So we define the function RGB to hex that takes three parameters, R, G, and B, which represent the red, green, and blue color values respectively in RGB format. These values are expected to be numbers between 0 and 255. Now I'm going to create a new function, which is going to be clamp. We need here a parameter value, and we have to return math.max. Then inside here we need 0 followed by math.minimum function, and inside here we need 255 and value. So now we define an internal helper function called clamp. The purpose of this function is to ensure that the RGB values stay within the valid range of 0 to 255. It does this by taking the input value and returning the value that is clamped within this range. If the value is lower than 0, it returns 0. If it's higher than 255, it returns 255. This ensures that even if the user enters a value that's outside the valid range, the application will automatically adjust it to fit within the correct boundaries. Let's break down how math.max and math.min are working together to achieve the above mentioned. The math.min function takes two arguments and returns the smallest of the provided values. In this case, we are passing two arguments to math_min function, 255 and value. What this does is check whether the value is smaller than 255. If it is, math.min function returns the value itself, but if the value is greater than 255, math.min will return 255. The math.max function works similarly to math.min, but instead of returning the smallest value, it returns the largest of the provided values. After the math.min step, we have a value that is guaranteed to be no larger than 255. However, we also need to make sure that the value isn't less than 0. That's where math.max comes into play. Math.max takes two arguments, 0 and the result of math.min function. What this does is check whether the resulting value is smaller than 0. If it is, math.max will return 0, otherwise it will return the value itself. So again, by combining these two functions, we effectively clamp the value within range of 0 to 255. Alright, so after that, we have to convert each of the RGB values to their hexadecimal equivalents. For that, we will use a toString and pathStart functions. I'm going to create new variable, and it's going to be red, which will be equal to clamp with the parameter r. Then we need toString method, in which I'm going to pass 16. And then this function should be followed pathStart, and the values will be 2 and 0. So this line of code is used to convert the clamped RGB value, in this case the red component, into a 2-digit hexadecimal string that can be used in a hex color code. Let's break this down step by step. First, the value r, representing the red component of the RGB color, is passed through the clamp function. This ensures that r is within the valid range of 0 and 255. If r is greater than 255, it will be clamped to 255, and if it is less than 0, it will be clamped to 0. Once the RGB value has been clamped to ensure it is valid, we convert that numeric value to a hexadecimal string using the toString method. It converts the clamped value from a base 10, decimal number, to a base 16 hexadecimal string. In JavaScript, the toString method is used to convert numbers to strings in different bases. By passing 16 as an argument to toString function, we are asking it to return the number as a hexadecimal string. For example, if r is 255, clamp 255 with toString function converts 255 to ff, which is the hexadecimal equivalent of 255. After converting the RGB value to a hexadecimal string, we use the pathStart method to ensure that the string is always at least 2 characters long. So pathStart with the values 2 and 0 adds padding to the start of the string until the string reaches a specified length. The first argument, 2, is the desired length of the string, and the second argument, 0, is the character that will be used to pad the string. For example, if the string is f, which is the hexadecimal representation of 15, pathStart will pad the string with one leading 0 to make it 0f. If the string is already 2 characters long, like ff, then no padding is needed, so the string remains ff. So in summary, this line of code first clamps the red value r to make sure it's within the range of 0 to 55. Next, it converts the value to a hexadecimal string using toString method, and finally pads the string with a leading 0 if necessary to ensure that it is always 2 characters long, which is required for a valid hex color code. Alright, so we need the same thing for green and blue components. I'm going to duplicate this line of code twice. Let's change the names of the variables. We need here green. Then we have to change R to G. Next we need blue. And I'm going to pass here B. Okay, so finally, we have to return a string that starts with # and combines the red, green, and blue hex values. This gives us the complete hex color code in the format of R, G, and B. So we need here return. Then I'm going to open template literal. Then we need #, followed by red. Then we need green. And finally, we need blue. All right, so now we have to convert hex values to RGB. I mean, we have to do the reverse of what we just explained. I'm going to create a new function here, and it's going to be hex to RGB. I'm going to add here a parameter hex. So we define the function. Actually, we need here hex. So as I said, we define here a function that takes a single parameter hex, which is the hex color code as a string. Next, we have to strip out the # symbol from the beginning of the hex code using replace method. So we need here hex equal to hex.replace, and I'm going to pass here #, and then we need an empty string. So this ensures that we are only working with the hexadecimal digits. For example, if the input is # followed by FF6757, after this step it becomes just FF6757. Then we have to use parseInt function to convert the individual parts of the hex code back into their decimal RGB equivalents. So I'm going to create here a new variable. It's going to be R, which should be equal to parseInt. Then I'm going to insert here hex.substring. We need 0, 2, and then I'm going to insert here 16. So this line of code is extracting a portion of the hex color string, specifically the red component, and then converting that portion from a hexadecimal string into a base 10 integer, which will be the RGB value for red. Let's break this down step by step. Let's start with the substring method. We use the substring method to extract the first two characters from the hex string. The substring method in JavaScript extracts a portion of a string starting from the start index and going up to, but no including, the end index. Start index is the index of the first character to include in the substring. End index is the index of the first character to exclude from the substring. So this function takes a substring of the hex string starting at index 0 and ending right before index 2. For example, if hex is FF6757, then hex.substring method will return FF, which represents the red component of the hex color. Once we have extracted the red component from the hex color code, we need to convert it into a base 10 integer that we can use as an RGB value. This is where the parseInt function comes in. The parseInt function takes a string and converts it into an integer. The second argument specifies the base or number system to use for the conversion. Now we need the same thing for green and blue color components. I'm going to duplicate this line of code twice and change here name of the variables. We need G, then B. As for the values in the substring method, we need here 2, then 4. As for the blue components, we need 4, and then 6. All right, finally, we have to return an object with 3 properties, R, G, and B. Each of these properties will hold the corresponding RGB value that was calculated from the hex code. So we need to return an object with R, G, and B. Alright, so once the RGB and hex values are converted, next we have to update the state variables. In this case, we have to use useEffect hook. In React, the useEffect hook allows us to perform side effects in function components. This includes things like data fetching, subscriptions, manually changing the DOM, or in this case, responding to changes in our component state and updating other parts of our app accordingly. So I'm going to use useEffect hook. As you see, it is imported automatically from React. If you don't see here useEffect, then you have to import it manually, otherwise you will get errors. So here I'm going to insert a callback function. Then we need set hex updater function. Actually, we need here camel case. Let's check if we have the correct name here. No, we need here camel case. Now inside set hex function, I'm going to use RGB to hex function, and as the argument, I'm going to insert RGB dot R, then RGB dot G, and RGB dot P. Then we need here a dependency array in which I'm going to insert RGB. Okay, so this useEffect hook watches for changes in the RGB state. Whenever the RGB state changes, meaning the user has adjusted one of the red, green, or blue values, this hook will execute and convert the new RGB values into a hex color code. Then it will update the hex state with this new value. Let's break it down step by step. The useEffect hook takes two arguments. The first argument is a function, which will run whenever the specified dependencies change. The second argument is an array of dependencies. In this case, we pass RGB, meaning this effect will only run when the RGB state changes. Inside the effect function, we are calling setHex function, which is our state updater function for the hex state. Inside the setHex function, we call our RGB to hex conversion function. We pass in the current values of RGBR, RGBG, and RGBB, the red, green, and blue components of the RGB color, as arguments. The RGB to hex function converts these values into a hex color code and returns it. Once the RGB to hex function returns the new hex value, we use setHex to update the hex state with this new value. The dependency array contains RGB. This tells React to run this effect only when the RGB state changes. For example, if the user modifies one of the RGB input values, like changing the red value, the RGB state is updated. When this happens, this effect runs, converting the new RGB values into the corresponding hex value and updating the hex state with this new value. Next, we have to update the RGB state variable using, again, useEffect hook. So I'm going to create another useEffect hook. Let's insert here a callback function. Then we need if statements, in which we have to validate the hex value using regular expressions. So I'm going to insert here some characters. Let's start with slash, then we need this character here, then the pound sign, followed by square brackets in which we need 0 to 9, capital A to FA, and then F. Then after that we need curly braces with 6, followed by the dollar sign. Then we need /i dot test, and inside here I'm going to pass hex. Okay, so if this condition is true, then we need set RGB function. We have to pass here hex to RGB function, and as the argument we need hex. Again, we need here a dependency array in which we have to specify hex. All right, so this useEffect hook watches for changes in the hex state. Whenever the hex state changes, meaning the user has entered or modified the hex color value, this hook will execute and convert the hex value into RGB format. Then it will update the RGB state with the converted values. This ensures that the RGB values are updated whenever the user changes the hex code. Again, this hook is similar to the first one but with a different dependency and different logic. The function that runs inside this hook will only execute when the hex state changes. Here we are using a regular expression to validate the hex code entered by the user. The regular expression checks whether the hex string starts with a pound sign, is followed by exactly 6 characters, where each character is a valid hexadecimal digit. The test method checks if the hex string matches this pattern. If the hex value is valid, we call setRGB to update the RGB state. We call the hex to RGB conversion function. We pass the valid hex value as an argument, and the function converts it into an RGB object with R, G, and B properties. Once the hex to RGB function returns the new RGB values, we use setRGB to update the RGB state with this new value. The dependency array contains hex. This tells React to run this effect only when the hex state changes. For example, if the user modifies the hex input like entering FF and then zeros, the hex state is updated. When this happens, this effect runs, converting the new hex value into the corresponding RGB values and updating the RGB state. Alright, so in summary, both of these useEffect hooks are essential for keeping the RGB and hex states synchronized. They ensure that whenever the user modifies one format, the other format is updated automatically. This provides a smooth and responsive user experience where the user can switch between color formats without any manual conversions. Okay, now we have to update the JSX of the input element to connect it to the state and make it interactive. This will allow our input fields to dynamically display and update the red, green, and blue components of the RGB color. So we have to find input elements, and here, instead of this hard-coded value, I'm going to insert RGB dot R. So here we are binding the value of the input field to the state. Specifically, RGB.R refers to the red component of the RGB color stored in the state. By setting the value of the input field to RGB.R, we ensure that the input field always displays the current red value from the state. For example, if the state has RGB with these values here, then the input field for the red component will show the value 255. This way, the input field is always in sync with the state, reflecting the most recent value of the red component. After that, I'm going to pass here onChange event handler, where we have to call handle RGB change function. So this is the event handler that we use to capture changes in the input field. Whenever the user types a new number or changes the value in the input field, the onChange event is triggered. The function handle RGB change is then executed. We need the same thing for the rest of the inputs, so I'm going to grab those two lines and paste them here. We need here G. Then we need the same thing for the third input element as well. I'm going to insert here P. Now we have to update the JSX of the hex input element as well to connect it to the state and make it interactive. This will allow our input field to dynamically display and update the hex color code. So here we have some hard-coded value. I'm going to get rid of it. Then I'm going to insert here hex. So here we are binding the value of the input field to the state variable hex. This means that the value displayed in the input field will always reflect the current value of the hex color code stored in the state. For example, if the state has hex FF6757, the input field will display FF6757 as its value. This binding ensures that the input field is always showing the correct hex value according to the state. Now we need to add here onChange event handler, and we have to call handle hex change function. Actually, we need here camel case. Let's correct the function name here as well. So this is an event handler that captures any changes made to the hex input field. Whenever the user types a new hex code or modifies the existing one, the onChange event is triggered and the handle hex change function is executed. Alright, so I think that's it. We can test the result, but I think that we have here some errors. Let's inspect the page and switch to the console tab. So we have here reference error, parse in is not defined. So we need camel case. Let's find parse int function. Here we have it. Let's change I with capital I. Now I think everything should work fine. So I'm going to change the values. As you can see, the color is changing, and also the hexadecimal value of our color is changing as well. Let's change the second component. So as you can see, everything works perfectly. Now I'm going to change the hexadecimal value. Let's use black color. Actually, I'm not able to change this value. Let's go down. Let's check the functions. So everything seems to be correct. So I see here the mistake. We need set hex with camel case. Now I think everything will work. Let's change the value. I'm going to insert here black color. So here we go. The color is changed, and also the RGB values are changed accordingly. All right, so let's make the color white. As you see, everything works perfectly. You can change the values manually by typing, and also you can scroll up and down. All right, so now I'm going to add little smooth effect to the color preview. Let's use transition with background color. Then the duration is going to be 0.2 seconds, and also we need the transition timing function is in out. Now if I change the hexadecimal color code, let's make it black. As you see, we have this nice and cool transition effect. All right, now that we have completed the functionality of our color converter app and everything is working great, it's time to make the app responsive. This means ensuring that our app looks good and works well across different screen sizes, from desktop to mobile devices. We will focus on adjusting the layout, scaling elements, and refining the design so that no matter what device you're using, the app delivers a smooth and user-friendly experience. Let's dive into making it responsive. I'm going to inspect the page, switch to the responsive mode. So I have prepared here some of the mostly used screen sizes for desktops, tablets, and mobile devices. I'm going to check the projects for desktop screen sizes. As you see, it looks pretty nice. Let's check the tablet. Well, it looks good as well. Now check the mobile screen sizes. As you can see, we have to make here some changes. I'm going to go to the index.css file and create new CSS media query, where I'm going to define the max width as 500 pixels. And on the breakpoint, I'm going to change the font size of the HTML element. Let's make it 50%. It will make all the elements smaller. Now I'm going to go to the app.css file and create new CSS media query. Actually, let's grab this code. paste it here, get rid of HTML. I'm going to customize the h1 heading element of the converter. Let's decrease the font size. Make it 3.5 RAM. Also, I'm going to change the height of the converter itself. So let's select these elements. I'm going to set height to 60, the input height. And also I'm going to change row gap. Let's make it 5 RAM. And now I'm going to change the direction of the flex layout of input groups. Let's go ahead and select input groups and set flex direction to column. Okay, so I think now everything looks good. Also, I'm going to create some space between the inputs using row gap with value 2 RAM. Alright, so as you can see, everything works perfectly, and we have here application responsive for mobile screens as well. Let's check the rest of the mobile screen sizes, mobile 2 and mobile 3, which is the smallest mobile screen size. Alright, so as we come to the end of this project, let's take a moment to recap everything we have achieved. We built an amazing color converter app that smoothly converts between RGB and HEX formats, complete with real-time updates, dynamic input handling, and a polished, responsive design. It's a powerful tool that not only looks great, but also provides valuable functionality for any web developer. If you found this tutorial helpful and enjoyed building this application with me, please do me a favor, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon to stay up to date with all my future content. And don't forget to leave a comment below. Let me know what you think of the app, what you learned, or what you'd like to see next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.